If you want to sit by yourself under a tree and not play, I guess you could do that, provided you don't interfere with our game. But if you come and interfere with our game and say, well, now look here, you people, you're all wrong. No, because you think you ought to be good. But it doesn't matter whether you're good enough, you mustn't do that. Don't interfere with a game just to have this kind of knowledge. That's why this kind of knowledge has always been esoteric. In any esoteric school, people were tested first before they got it, to find out if they were civilized. In other words, you can't give powerful tools and powerful knowledge to people who aren't civilized, who have no humor, and who lack graciousness. That's why it's difficult when young people get hold of knowledge they aren't emotionally prepared for. For example, if they're given full and total instruction on birth control at 4 years old, it might mean nothing at all, or worse, something positively dangerous. But nowadays, there's no way of concealing these things. I said it's a secret, but in the world of science, there are no secrets. So I don't feel any compunction about talking about these things because if I don't, someone else will. After all, an awful lot of people already know about it. But that's the inside dope, if I may say so. These extremes lead into each other and can't manifest without each other. The point, though, is how to keep your head when you know that. So, let's have an intermission. This morning I was dealing mainly with two key ideas. One was the physical universe as a system of intermeshing spectra, depending on and playing with each other, much like warp and woof in weaving. I emphasized that these spectra are different dimensions rather than components of the physical world. Although I'm using the word physical here, I mean it in its original sense, natural, rather than the later meaning attached to it, material. This is the same material world people imagine when they think of it as being made out of stuff. You see, as we all know, stuff is supposed to be something inert and stupid, incapable of doing anything. For stuff to take on intelligent shapes, it supposedly needs to be informed by some external energy or intelligence that gives it shape. This idea stems from analogies between creation and carpentry, ceramics, or sculpture. Just as a side note, good potters and sculptors don't treat their mediums as if they're stupid. A good potter, for instance, knows there's life in the clay. They must respond to that life to work properly. Those who aren't artists often miss this. For centuries, though, the public has been bamboozled into thinking patterns must be composed of some basic stuff. I was trying to substitute this conception of the world with the idea of interweaving spectra, different dimensions of energy or patterning. I use the verb patterning deliberately, as distinct from the noun pattern, because nouns paired with verbs obscure language. This misleads people. The unnecessary distinction between nouns and verbs often gives the impression that every action, described by a verb, must originate from a thing, described by a noun. For example, when someone says, there is thinking, they might ask, well, who is thinking? The assumption is that thinking requires a thinker. But this is merely a grammatical convention. Every verb in English needs a subject, a noun, and this leads us to suppose that events, verbs, are caused by things, nouns. But when you ask someone what a thing or an event is, they usually end up giving vague synonyms. You can describe events in terms of things and vice versa. For example, consider the sentence, the cat sat on the mat while the dog went for a walk. That's standard noun-verb language. But you could also say, while the catting sat on the matting, the dogging went walking. The meaning remains clear, even though everything is expressed as verbs. Or you could flip it entirely to nouns. The cat's sitting on the mat, and the dog's walking around the house. Both approaches are valid. Now, consider the word fist. A fist is a noun, but it describes a process. It's not really a thing because the fist disappears the moment you open your hand. What happened to it? You stopped fisting and started handing. This shows how the verb-oriented perspective better reflects the dynamic nature of reality. When you frame everything in verbs, you realize you don't need a thing to start an action. Nature is better understood as process, not as objects or nouns. The second point I focused on was the relationship between extremes in a spectrum, like sound and silence, light and dark, space and solid. According to the Chinese yin-yang philosophy, these extremes aren't opposites. They're complementary. Light and darkness, being and non-being, they don't exist independently. Without one, the other can't exist. In this way, the universe isn't an opposition of opposites but a balance of poles. If we imagine a parallel universe, there's no need to fear the idea of existence ceasing forever. The cosmological debate about whether the universe is in a steady state or expanding endlessly doesn't matter in this regard. Steady state theorists argue that hydrogen in space continually forms new bodies. Explosion theorists believe there was an initial concentration of energy that blew up, expelling galaxies outward. Both theories describe patterns, but neither touches on the bigger picture. What happened once can happen again. If the universe can die and restart, then nothing is ever truly lost. I like to think of myself as a curious phenomenon the universe is playing. Played me this time, and it might play me again in some form a million years from now. It's like replaying a piece of music. It's the same melody, but each performance is slightly different. This is the beauty of existence. Each one of us is the center through which the universe observes itself. Everyone feels like the I, yet we're all connected, like light shining through different holes in a sphere. But anyone knows, from a physical point of view, that every organism is simply a pattern of behavior which can't be separated from the pattern of behavior we call its environment. It's all one pattern, except the one pattern, like every one pattern, has its variations. Take any pattern, like say the pattern in these bamboos. There's a pattern, and every pattern has wiggles in it. There are sub-wiggles and sub-sub-wiggles. See, the main wiggle is the stem. Then the twig comes out as a sub-wiggle. The leaf comes out as a sub-sub-wiggle. And if you look even closer, there are sub-sub-sub-wiggles. And that's the way it goes. They all belong to the pattern. It's difficult to say who's wiggling what. Is the stem wiggling the leaves? Or are the leaves wiggling the stem? Both arguments are equally valid. The universe is doing me, and I'm doing the universe, because the universe depends on my optic nerves and all that structure to turn light into something we call seeing. Light wouldn't be light without eyes to perceive it. That's like a hand on a drum. If there's no drum skin, there's no sound. It takes two to make love, to make an argument, or to do anything. That's the analogy. Now, let's go through the spectrum, or begin to go through it. I'm not going to go all the way through it this afternoon. We begin at the end of sleep or torpor, and we'll go as far as number 3. Do you know that sleep is a very mysterious subject? Scientific studies of sleep are still not entirely sure what sleep is. Apparently, people need it, but nobody really knows why, at least not from a strictly scientific point of view. We also seem to need to dream during sleep. People deprived of dreams get very restless and unhappy. But again, we're not quite sure why we need to dream. Sure, there are theories, the Freudian, the Jungian, and so on, but none of them have rigorously established why dreaming is necessary. From a naive point of view, though, you could say, of course I need to sleep. After a whole day of business, friends, work, and so on, it's just too much input. I need time to digest it all. And while I'm digesting, I don't want any more input. That's one of those simple, common sense things everybody knows, but it hasn't yet been fully explained. Sleep, then, is this marvelous thing we have, a process of forgetting that seems essential to our psychic health. If you don't get it, though, you start to worry. And here's the thing about insomnia. The worst thing you can do is worry about it. When I can't sleep, I don't try to force myself. I get up, work, or read a difficult book, preferably one that's big and heavy. That's a great way to get to sleep. But don't ever try to go to sleep. Nobody can try to sleep. Mothers tell their children, darling, try to go to sleep. But really, they just want the child out of the way. Sleep, like many good things, must happen spontaneously. It's a way of turning yourself off, of forgetting, so you can renew. Men are pretty bad, but women, the men do it around the neck. You know, the necktie is a symbol of slavery. It's a noose to strangle you. But you feel tight, really held in here and held in by the belt. And women wear girdles to hold them in like this. Then there's the coat that fits your body. A jacket, you put it on and it fits and you're squeezed. Or you get those tight pants that hug you. There are other people, of course, who don't know they're there until they're sitting on spikes. Then they really know they're there. And a lot of people make trouble for themselves in order to be able to sit on spikes so that they know they're there. Supposing instead you switch to another kind of clothes, you wear Japanese clothes. I often wear Japanese clothes because they happen to be For men, the most comfortable form of clothing ever devised. There's only one place where it holds you, and that's the belt. But you wear the belt not around your waist but below your belly, and you wear it rather loose. Otherwise, the garments are flowing. They don't interfere with the nature of the cloth, because the cloth is woven on a rectilinear pattern. The cloth is straight like this, so when you get a Japanese kimono, it folds up instantly for packing. But you try to pack a Western man's jacket or a woman's suit jacket, and there's absolutely no way of folding the thing at all. It always comes out of your suitcase needing to go to the pressing. But you take a kimono and you put it on, and it falls exactly according to its own nature around you. They're very dignified and you feel, but you don't feel closed in. Now, that makes some people terribly uncomfortable. If they don't feel pinched and pulled together, they don't feel dressed. They feel this is like going around in a bathrobe. And a lot of people can't wear a bathrobe beyond a certain hour of the day because they don't feel that they're respectable. I mean, you can perfectly well get up and put yourself into the most beautiful, gorgeous bathrobe you want, and run around and do your work if you don't have to go to the office. Even if you had to go to the office, they ought to allow you to wear interesting robes. Furthermore, I once asked a Japanese man why he didn't wear a kimono anymore. He said, "You can't run for a bus in a kimono." Well, it's perfectly true. Unless you hoist it up and tie it into the belt, you can't. And that's rather undignified. But the thing is, in this age that is now forthcoming, when we're going to cut down the working hours because of automation, people have got to learn to saunter and dawdle. Otherwise, they'll get into mischief. And so, clever forms of clothing, which are supremely comfortable but which require a kind of a sauntering attitude to life, are going to be very important for the future of civilization. This pitch for the kimono market. But this is all to do with letting yourself go into the earth, into the darkness, as it were, and trusting the world that lies below you as much as you might trust the world that lies above you. Drop. Fall freely in space. That's a marvelous sensation. It's like floating. That's why people do skydiving, because just until they pull that parachute, they experience the sensation of flying. Even though they're dropping very fast, they get the sensation of total freedom. That's what everybody's looking for. We get that in a way in sleep, in the arms of Morpheus. The idea is sleep as healing. Some psychiatrists are very keen on the idea of putting their patients, by hypnosis and other methods, into long, long periods of sleep where they feel completely secure, looked after, and have nothing to worry about. I have a favorite sleeping place. It's a house on top of the hills in Hollywood. There are great eucalyptus trees, and underneath them, there is a deck. I like to get a sleeping bag, lie on my back under these eucalyptus trees, look up at the stars through the shadows of leaves, and just go. There's a marvelous feeling in that. Well, now, we come to the themes of sleep. I will say one thing about dreaming and about torpor. We know the motto in vino veritas, in wine, the truth comes out. This also has a subtle double take, meaning that all popular sayings have many levels of meaning. As a Christian saying, in vino veritas belongs to Western culture. It also means, in the wine is the true blood of Christ, as in the Catholic Massachusetts. That refers to the fact that life requires death, drinking blood. But in the sense of in vino veritas, the person reveals himself, lets go of himself, lets his unconscious come out when he is drunk, or also in sleep when the dreams come up and show the inner side of things. You will see in that way that these two states can, in a certain sense, be creative. They let things come up which are normally put down because the waking state, what we will call symbolic consciousness, is highly guarded. It is the most guarded of all these states. Now, I want you to understand that the ordinary state of consciousness, what you call normal consciousness, is by no means a frank, objective awareness of the real world. Not by any means at all. It is a state of highly cultivated, hothouse-reared, special ways of perceiving the world in accordance with symbolic formulae.